Okay. How about now? Is it better?
Yes, it's better now.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, Silas, for the introduction. I will try to manage the time. I'm informed that we do this most preferably for an hour, and then we can allow a few minutes for questions, and try to keep to that. If we discover that we have more to do, then we can ask the administrator, EREVOOKA, to allow a section 2 or a lesson 2 with the same topic, so that we don't rush and we don't also skip the discussion part, which I should give a few minutes towards the end. Silas, my colleague, has introduced me very well, so I'll prefer not to talk about myself anymore, but just to proceed with the topic of today. I also know that the topic we're discussing today is quite familiar to most of us, so I would like to invite you to the chat room. You chat, write things, write suggestions. When I ask a question, write on the chat what you think, and then maybe on the other end, you can take note of any comments that may need to be raised in the course of the lesson, so that we do not leave them out. But I want it to be a bit interactive in as much as we have only an hour, so that we can be able to get as many responses as possible. This program comes to you from many people. It's really just trying to look at who can be able to provide what knowledge, not because there's anyone who has a lot of knowledge on their own. So what we do is that we try to gather as much as possible when we go to farms to support farmers, and when we interact with you on the WhatsApp at DAFMA and other groups, we collect the information. But what else we also do is that we also check what are you asking for? What information are you seeking? And then we give ourselves homework so that we can be able to get more information and consolidate something that we can deliver here as a package of lesson for EREVOOKA. So I'm looking forward to a good session today. So let's first deal with the questions that we hear people asking. And I think, I don't know whether my video is still, if you see me, it's fine. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, if all I have is Napier, what else do I need to get 20 liters from my cow? That's a common question. I have just indicated 20, more like just a figure there, but they ask, that question comes up, if all I have is Napier, or if I have Napier, what else do I need? That basically is a question about ration, if you look at it widely. We also hear questions like, sorry. I think I see there are a lot of people coming in, so this admission part is coming to me a bit, so I think let's see how we manage that. Second one is
care of the admission.
Okay. Why do I need to wield Napier if my cows are enjoying, if I use the word enjoying, the Napier as a fresh cut? Why do I need to wield? Because for many years, farmers have fed Napier when it is not wilted. I think that is going to come up in our discussion. And also, to what extent are we wilting? We have seen farms where people literally dry the Napier and we have brown color on the leaves, and you can tell that we have lost it. Is Napier really useful for high yielders, dairy and beef stock, high yielding dairy and beef stock, high live weight, high weight gain requirement? Is Napier useful, or is it really a smallholder forage? Which is really a good question, because PERFOMETER for a long time, in the first 5 years of our work, we dealt a lot with the commercial farmers, and Napier was not part of their rations. it was left out, particularly because it was found to be either, very high moisture and really not supporting the higher life weight animals and whose milk expectations per day is much higher, pedigrees and so on. But let's deal with this question because I think over time, we have found a place in TMR where Napier fits very well, and farmers are continuing with innovating rations where Napier is critical. So it's a good question, by all means. Which Napier variety is the best to grow if I want to optimize nutrition for my dairy and beef herd? The issue of variety is coming up. Kenyans are great learners. And if I look at the discussion we've been having for the last couple of weeks, I think from the time we did a test at CropNut, which was really more like a comparative test between Junkao and Super Napier, we have been asked for that sample analysis by more than 50 people asking, can I have this? Can I have this? Meaning that people are interested and they would like to plant only that one, which is going to give them the best returns for their feeding value. But the question is there a best variety, or are we avoiding the real conversation? Okay, so we'll see what happens there. Then which is the right time to cut Napier for best feeding outcomes? A question that has been asked for many years. We are going to discuss that. It's a critical. Then something that came up, who made this discussion very, but still very informative, cows with Napier every day. Should I nitrite poisoning? Of course, this is a critical question because it is about animals dying. I don't think a cow will survive this. Really more like a quick mortality incident. But it also tends to bother vet because the moment a cow gets sick, then we are no longer discussing forage. We are discussing health, and that then goes into the regime of, but yes, as long as it is coming from very many farmers buying a forage chopper, and what they are chopping day in, day out is Napier and sorghum, none of which has grain, and they are buying a chopper. Then you discover that there could be a mismatch in the mechanization where somebody only requires a chaff cutter just to slice into small chops for the TMR or for the ease of the cow to pick up. Then you discover they are tearing or they're using a chopper, more like an overkill. Again, we also handle that. And if it doesn't come up, then please put it on the chat so that we don't leave it out. So let's start with the basics of Napier. And possibly this is really what you have been doing, but also to try also and avoid neglecting the basics, the things that we know. Just understanding what Napier is, and also understanding how to manage it, where we are missing the point, and that way we are able to get more value from Napier. If you notice the topic, we put it as weeding with Napier. Already we began on a positive note by saying that Napier is great and we should observe it carefully and we can benefit from it. So Napier is fixed stem and it's perennial. Fixed stem, that is self-explanatory, and is also perennial. Up to 3 to 5 years on good management, you can be able to enjoy your cuttings. Your cuts for 3 to 5 years. That's what I mean by perennial, as opposed to an annual or a multi-cut that goes for fodder tools and it's over, like sorghum or maize, which is really a seasonal when you have to cut the whole of it and plant again. So this is really a big benefit. I'm sure I'll be talking about the merits of Napier in this regard. Then we have the rainfall levels, 750 estimated to 2500. But then there's a range. The scientists are giving this one as a range. So there is a limit to which Napier would give you struggle or would not thrive. Because when you say thrive, you're talking about it is going to give you good results, but below 750, then you have to irrigate. That does not mean that it won't grow, but you can now see that you have to incur more cost to ensure that it is well irrigated. So thriving past 950 mm per year, with optimal growth for temperature, 18 to 26, but very sensitive to frost. There are some areas in our country where frost is common. You just wake up in the morning and you find something happened. So Napier will not do very well, it may not impress you. Perhaps there will be other alternatives. Then in terms of altitude, is from sea level to 200.
Sorry, David, your net is not so good. There's a bit of
however,
buffering.
It is best at mid above sea level. Okay.
David, your sound is not so good. There's a bit of buffering.
Yes, I've heard you. Let me see what I'm using here.
Okay.
Why is it not so good? Do you call it 4 out of 5 or it's below that?
There's a bit of variation. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but just before I stopped, it was buffering. So we were taking long to get you. You know, the way it looks like it's almost drifting off.
Okay, because I'm using a dedicated line, so I'm not sharing with the other people. So I don't expect any variations with the strength. Let's hope that it stabilizes. Otherwise, this is the best I have now.
Okay.
So I hope it
We'll
works.
keep adulting you.
I'm not sharing the Wi-Fi I'm using. It's dedicated for this, so I really hope that it can be stable. Yeah, so let me continue, but I'm
We can't hear you now. Can't hear. David, for a minute, we have not been hearing you.
The quality of my
We can't hear you,
voice,
David.
something like that.
No.
David,
So
we have lost you for about a
We
minute or
lost
so.
you like a minute.
We can't hear you.
Oh.
What's up?
Am I back?
Yeah,
Yeah,
but for a
maybe you
minute,
can
we
try
didn't
put
hear
off the video.
anything.
Yes, you're back now.
I'm back now?
Yeah, maybe you
Yes.
put off your
Yes.
video.
Okay. I'll do that.
Maybe you switch off the video to see if it can create some more bandwidth.
I suspect it's because I track from coming in. So let me also get it better. So we said about the pH. We have a range between 4.5 and 8.4. Of course, we always encourage if you can be able to get it to neutral, if you see that is really the average pH, and it doesn't do well with waterlogging. In case you have waterlogging, then there's a problem. Napier requires adequate sunlight. Clearly, without sunlight, you're going to experience lower growth or stunted. Also, when you plant in shaded places where you have shadow, you'll expect that it will be slower. But definitely, when you have more fertile soils, you get higher yields. I think we need to also come to terms with the fact that where we go wrong with Napier is really in the husbandry, not very much the fact that we have this variety or the other. There is a high likelihood that we mostly go wrong on how we manage it. And therefore, just like an animal, you have a very good genetic promise on a Frisian pedigree or any other pedigree, but the management is where the story is. So in the same way, I think the theory of husbandry is that if you do not get it right in managing that crop or managing that animal, then that scientific claim on the genetics may not be achieved. So this is my emphasis for this part. We all know that Napier is it is propagated vegetatively using mature stem cuttings with at least 3 nodes or root splits. This one is something we probably have interacted with because of the sales that are going on for Napier. Right now, not so much. Sorry. Yeah, and the other one is about the cuttings and how they should be cut. When you're getting your cuttings, if you look at the top or down, it is not a straight, it is cut at an angle. It is sliced at an angle, and then it is planted on a slanting angle with 2 nodes inside the soil and the buds facing upward. If you got the splits and not the cuttings, then you can plant it straight upright on the holes. I have seen people who plant almost like 15 degrees, like it's almost lying down, still okay if it works for you, but what is recommended is it's 45. I also saw a farmer who planted right inside the soil, like burying the whole cutting horizontally into the soil. What we discovered later on, it was gone. It wasn't very successful. It was like 15% success. The spacing varies with soil fertility. I know people are doing much smaller spacing, but even if you did 1 by 1, expect the class. I don't know why we are having that.
You muted
challenge.
for some few seconds. I don't know what's happened.
Am I sharing now?
The presentation has gone off.
Okay. Let's hope that we get somewhere with this, because I don't know why we have this challenge. I want to continue with the basics. It's back now. Okay. Fertilizer at planting. Of course, for root development, phosphate fertilizer is important, and it is not very much per hole. We are talking about 1 to 2 bottle caps of DAP, about 5 to 10 grams per hole. Then you mix with soil very carefully. And if you're using manure, use well-cured manure, 1 to 2 handfuls. So you can use your hand to administer manure. It doesn't have to be a lot. What do we mean by well-cured? we are not talking about wet slurry or manure that you just collected from fresh dung, because they are so good manure from the arsal areas, fresh manure from the barn. For good establishment, keep the soil moist after planting, and you are going to get your first harvest in 3 to 4 months after planting, which is basically 1 meter tall. Stay long enough to get 1 meter to allow the root to be able to establish. I think cutting earlier might disturb the rooting system. Napier is not good at competing with wheat initially when it is young. So for the first and second month, it's important to ensure that weeding is done very well. Otherwise, the young Napier might not access all the nutrients that you worked so hard to put at the point of planting. Napier is a guzzler of nitrogen. So after each cut, get to get a good result, top dress. Just cutting, do a top dressing with nitrogen. Again, not too much, 2 to 3 teaspoons of CN per stool. If you calculate that, sorry, this is per acre. Per hectare, that would be a lot more, about 150 or thereabout. And you can also equivalent, you can use the same, you can use equivalent for organic manure. There are some converters. If your manure has been tested, then you can easily know how much nitrogen you are putting into this. If it has not been tested, and I think most farmers don't test it in the manure, but it's important. And this is not just for Napier, I think for all grasses, even for farmers who are doing grazing. The professional grazing for dairy, especially, and beef, they mow the paddock, and after the cows have eaten, and then they fertilize afresh. So that gives them a stronger rigor. And apply potassium and phosphate. On Napier can easily exhaust soil potassium due to large biomass uptake. So if you're able to note that in your soil testing, again, soil testing can be done annually. I think some farmers do it just once, and then they assume that this is going to be my basis for fertilizer application. The reality is, once a crop has gone through a season, there could be some depletion of certain minerals, of certain elements of soil fertility. And in that case, then it's important to check your soil again and see what you need to add if you are aiming to optimize the yields at harvesting. The first, and which is a major issue, is that I don't think this is really a problem for many people. I think cutting height is not a major problem. I only saw a problem in Nigeria, and I think in one of the WhatsApp groups, I actually sent that video, a small video there, and Kenyans were laughing at it. It was a Nigerian farmer who had gotten Napier from Kenya. And these are the owner of the farm, and he was told by whoever gave him the cuttings that when you plant this Napier, and it was Kakamega actually, not the improved varieties, about 5-6 years ago, he was told that make sure that you cut the Napier at 1 meter. So he went and told his workers to cut Napier at 1 meter. But what the guy was doing when I went, and they had done it for 4 or 5 years, is that when Napier grew, he was actually cutting at 1 meter as the stable height. You can see the confusion he is putting, instead of cutting at the bottom, he was cutting at the top. And then all the other very ugly like a bush. Then I okay, sorry. For best quality, cut every 6 to 8 weeks during the growing season. Every 8 weeks in warm areas, but for the colder areas, it can go to 12 weeks. Like we said, areas that are colder will experience slower growth, and that is not only for Napier. I think that's really an agronomy, it's something that you would understand even for maize, that people in warmer areas tend to harvest a lot earlier. The right cutting time for Napier is everything, because it gives you optimal yield and you have more cuts. Good feeding value when you go to the feeding trough. For best quality, this is already handled. I think you don't have that. So what about the varieties? Let's talk about the varieties now. I think this is very important. We have Napier there, which I think one of members at DAFMA is also selling this Napier. Australia has published stems for softness and very about 180 tons per year per acre on fresh material. And due to the softer texture, then it has higher intake by the animals. What that means is that animals are more likely to exhaust what you put on the trough because it is attractive for them. When people say, or when researchers record the sweetness, I think this is not very clear whether they mean if you taste, like if you take the way people taste Napier and find some sugar in it, or sorghum or sugarcane, then it is sweet to you. Then it's an indicator, pointer, or a predictor of high sugar levels. But I don't know whether the sweetness is defined on the cow. But really what we're basically saying is it has higher sugar levels. We have Kakamega 1 and 2, which are Karo varieties. Karo worked very hard because previously we had diseased varieties that were really getting affected by diseases. This one is resistant to a few diseases, but most prominently the head smut. And then also the Kakamega variety was known for vigorous growth. In fact, if you looked at it earlier before we had the improved varieties, it was the best and the most talked about variety, Kakamega 1 and 2. And they had also developed them in such a way that Kakamega 1 was doing well in, Kakamega 2 was doing well in cooler highlands, and they had Kakamega 1 for a different climatic context. So basically just really doing the same thing, but breeding it in such a way that it can grow in different places. If we have anybody from Karo, you can put a chart on the chart, something to do with Kakamega 1 and 2, Dr. Miano, if you're there, or Dr. Kuria, if you're there, because Karo is really the ones that started and distributed Kakamega 1 and 2 varieties about 20 years ago, I think. We have Pakichong Napier, which is branded also as Super Napier. This is a Thai breed, a crossbreed of Napier times palm millet, basically a crossbreed. It is not clear how much of which, because we are not going to the details of plant breeding, And if we go to the details of plant breeding, I am not myself a plant breeder. In fact, if you notice, we approach fodder and livestock from a business angle, not very much from a technical angle. And that's why I'm saying we can be able to do collaborative learning, where if you have more information, you can also put it on the chat and we can be able to discuss it later. But for now, we look at what has been put already on referenced material about these varieties. This Super Napier Pak Chong has been already proven to be having high biomass and high nutritional yields if you compare with the earlier varieties of Kakamega 1 and 2, especially for yields. Because today, if you go to Karo Naivasha, I don't know whether they still maintain those placards on the farm. They indicate the expected yield. They also indicate the dry matter level. They indicate also, I think, the dry matter and the expected tonnage in dry matter. You could see clearly that it was about a half of what is now claimed for Super Napier. So you can see in terms of biomass yield, it was very clear that the improved varieties were doing much better than Kakamega. Of course, now the advantage of a smooth stem without the hairs, it was very well received in the market because of handling. The softer leaves, the height, 3 to 4 meters high. If you have seen anyone who has let their Pak Chong grow, it gets really the canes get very, very high. And the crude protein, we have tested several times, and the crude protein has been very consistent. At some point, we requested Makitosha to cut between Junkao and Super Napier, and she did a very, very good job. She planted in alternate rows, where on one row you have Junkao, on the other row you have Pak Chong, and they were growing at the same time. She fertilized the same way. And I mean, it was really like a scientific process. If you had somebody like a master's student embedding their study on that process, in my view, it was meticulous. And we have released that analysis to the group, which was more like a comparative between Pak Chong and Junkao. Junkao is a Chinese cultivar, which is said to be a hybrid of elephant grass with wild millet, very tall and succulent. When you look at a well taken care field of Junkao, it's very impressive. The green, the succulency of the stems, the foliage, looks very good. 3 months to mature and up to 180 tons per acre per year of fresh cut. So if you look at the yield, if you have to compare the yield in fresh cut or as fed between Pak Chong and Junkao, you don't see notable differences. More like the same. If you look at the crude protein, you notice a marginal, you see a margin where Pak Chong will register higher levels of crude protein and Junkao having, say, like 2 or 3 steps behind on crude protein. But they also don't differ on dry matter. So if you think with me, think about a forage whose dry matter is between 15 and 20%. Then if you're talking about a crude protein level of a percentage of dry matter, then what would be the difference between 18% of 20 and 15% of 20? Because the crude protein value on the sample is being compared, or it's being expressed only on the dry matter. So the rest of the moisture is not factored in. So then you realize that in terms of the net feeding value, it is very, very, it's neither here nor there, more like Siamese twins. The only thing that we found was very low at the point that Makitosha was testing, and we did it for her. Basically, she did the work of preparing the sample, and then we took the sample to the lab. You will notice very low dry matter, I think about 17, below what Kakamega had, because Kakamega would register 22, 20, 22, 20, sometimes when it's too mature, 25, because dry matter is going to increase with the increase in fiber. as the stem matures. So 17% is very low. But also, you need to check what was actually presented to CropNat at that point. And we sent out pictures. It was actually more like a 1 foot sprout, not very mature. So in that case, it would be expected that the dry matter would be very low. If it was allowed to grow further, a few things would change. You'd have a higher dry matter, but then you'd also expect that the protein level would reduce and also the energy level would come down. I think the energy was about 8 megajoules per kg. So this discussion of which way between pak chong and junkao, you can see that if you really look down at the feeding value, then there may not be a big difference, unless we are talking about differences in the way they handle the agroecological environment or agroecological zone. For example, junkao has been mentioned to be drought tolerant and having a faster regrowth. But at the same time, pak chong has not had any doubts, and the people who planting pak chong have not had any problems. Nobody has complained about regrowth. Looks like it's still okay, it's acceptable, works very well. Now, the issue of drought tolerance, we now have to ask ourselves, to what extent can a thick stem, if you look at the basics of Napier husbandry, survive without much water? What would happen? Are we saying that even with the deficiency in water, we would still be able to get 180 tons per acre per year? Then that is doubtful. So if you're exposing Napier to lower rainfall levels, then you may get something out of it, but you cannot continue expecting the same yield in fresh weight or whichever way you express it, or maybe in dry matter. You cannot get the same protein level, and you cannot get the same other critical dietary parameters like energy and so on. They will deteriorate. So I think we need to wait until we have proper scientific processes. Maybe Carol is taking it up, or International Livestock Research Institute, so that we have somebody we can be able to ask a question the way we do for maize. If you tell me that this maize is early maturing and your Pana seeds or your Kenya seeds, I can be able to take you to task and say, how come you said I can be able to harvest in 3 months, and you have indicated on the bag that I should be harvesting after this period, and now it is still on the farm 3 months later? Then you can actually even seek legal redress. I know farmers who've done that. But for the case of Napier, right now it is farmers who are planting and sharing their experiences. Until we have a proper registration and a proper profiling of these two Napiers with regard to critical parameters of growth and nutritional profile, then we cannot put anyone to task on whether it was drought tolerant or not. But in terms of the basic husbandry requirements for Napier, it is difficult to expect the same results on yield when you're exposing Napier to lower rainfall or lower water supply. So these are the 4 that we featured for now. There's something I encourage farmers to do. Instead of making your farm an experiment farm, where you have a plot for Kakamega, you have a plot for pak chong, you have a plot for junkao, then if you are really doing commercial farming, you can look at what works for you. You can plant 2 varieties and check what works. Whatever works, if it is not giving you serious challenges like diseases or things like that, then go with it and make the plot now scalable or feasible, instead of maintaining small plots like what Calro would do for their own experiments. Yours is a farm, not a trial. So expand what is working for you and let it go to volumes that can be able to support your commercial farming agenda. Otherwise, farmers planting very small plots, sometimes it also takes your time, and really you're not in the agenda of experiment. Let's talk about the nutritional profile of Napier. I think that is an important aspect that we need to look at. The dry matter, as we have mentioned, we have a range of between 15 to 20 which is a dry matter. If you remember when people were introducing the Super Napier into the market, especially for the groups that are less intensive like Facebook, there were claims of if I get 16% crude protein or 18% crude protein from Super Napier, Pak Chong, then does it mean that it has an equivalent feeding value in as far as crude protein is concerned with dairy meal? Because dairy meal, I have a dairy meal of 16% and have a superior dairy meal, which is a high yielder for 18%. Of course, the difference here then, which by now we know because we're talking about 2-3 years ago, is a dry matter. Because you cannot be comparing a protein forage, which is 20% at best or 22% at best in dry matter, and a concentrate like dairy meal, cotton seed cake, canola, sunflower seed cake, soya, which are basically dry supplements at 89 to 92% dry matter. This is really like they're worlds apart. So the indication of crude protein at 18 or at 16 does not mean that there's any comparison between a wet forage of this level of moisture with a concentrate that is almost entirely dry. So they can supplement each other, but there's no comparison. If you cut it younger, it is also much lower in moisture. So this, I've explained that this is actually why the Makitosha sample could have registered very low dry matter levels. But that also means that it gave us a higher crude protein. Maybe what we could have done, if you were really on an academic process or we were doing research, we would have cut the same crop when it is now at what they call mid-teens, before it goes to high lignin, like what I'm showing on the picture. If you can see that picture, that Napier is already passed because the stems are too strong, and the lignin could actually be rising to 5%, which is really one of the factors that determines intake at the trough. So if we had checked the same crop a few months, maybe a month later, there's a likelihood that we would have had, for sure, we would have had a higher dry matter. But also, are we likely to have registered the same crude protein? So more mature, thicker stems will have higher dry matter. The high moisture therefore means that we have when the cow is finally eating or taking this feed, we are likely to have less intake if the feed is too low. This is one of we are going to be looking at it as a limitation of Napier. And no matter how much we want to place Napier as a premium forage, the limiting factor will always be the dry matter. Because even if we wilt Napier, we are probably getting to mid-20s in terms of dry matter. We may not be able to go beyond that. So that's a limiting factor, and we shall feature it as such. We have the crude protein level, typically 8 to 10%. This is what was registered for Kakamega. I said that crude protein is always expressed as a percentage of dry matter, not as a percentage of the entire biomass. So this is for mid-maturity Napier. But now with improved varieties, we have seen much higher levels of protein. And we have also said that the age at which you cut also determines how you register this. But surprisingly, can you imagine there's somebody today who has Junkao or Super Napier Pak Chong, but instead of getting what we have tested and proven of highs of 15 to 18%, would still get 7%, regardless of the fact that they have an improved variety of Napier on their farm. And you can tell why this would happen. It would happen because of husbandry. There are many factors that determine the nutritional outcome of this one. So CP is a great thing. We have compared between, if you look at the crude protein for sorghum, it would be around the same for sorghum that is not allowed to go to grain, including this is the sugar grains. If it's not going to grain, it might register almost the same level of protein. But I've also had people asking, why is it that we are seeing maize silage having 10% of crude protein almost consistently, every sample showing 10%, when Napier is showing above 15%? Does it then mean that Napier is better than that Napier is better than maize silage? That's a good question, because then it brings in, I think that discussion should actually come up in DAFMA, where people are comparing a forage that is fundamentally starch, energy forage, and one that is primarily used for protein. If you are going to compare, to expect maize to have more than 10% of crude protein, then it looks like you're judging maize as a forage protein, just like Napier, Lucerne, and other grasses. Ideally, I have seen samples from the Netherlands. I have seen, tested in very big labs like BLGG. If you go to your research, you find those labs. I hope they have not changed their names, because the company was acquired a few years ago. But those labs were testing Kenyan samples and also testing Dutch samples. I didn't see any sample in the Netherlands for maize that exceeded 10% crude protein. However, we are seeing samples in Kenya for maize that are up to 14 and 16% of crude protein, which then comes at the same level of Napier. But if you look at those samples, it is very suspect to have a sample of maize showing 16%, because what that tells you is that either this maize didn't mature, so it is what we can call an aborted crop. Maybe somebody found that the rains are running dry, and therefore I have to cut it even before it goes to cob. So what basically you have is a young succulent maize. In that case, it can go to 16%, but the dry matter would be like Napier, apart from high energy levels. But if you allow maize to mature and we are cutting it at that stage, you shouldn't be getting more than 10%. And we shouldn't be comparing. It's an unfair comparison. It's like we are comparing the protein level of fish versus the protein level of ugali. So let me leave the crude protein discussion there, but let us know that at this point, if you let Napier overgrow, because you can't cut, it ranged too much, and you couldn't manage the regrowth, by the time you are managing the previous season, the other one has grown, so you let it grow, it can go as low as 3%. So the range of crude protein is actually between 3 and 20. The highest you can ever get with good management, with good proper cutting, well-timed harvest, versus a poorly managed crop led to grow and a poor cutting timing for harvesting. Let's talk about fiber. Napier is fibrous, especially as it matures. If you can be able to draw a curve or a graph of Napier, if you're familiar with that L-shaped graph, you can see that what would be rising, what would be having a positive growth would be fiber. Fiber will be increasing right from the time it is a sprout all the way to the time it is highly lignified at very tall varieties, like people who want to sell cuttings, the way they let it grow. Fiber would be at the highest. As it gets high, then the measure that emerges from a sample analysis at CropNut, you're going to notice high levels of NDF, high levels of, which is also, I would say, from a layman's point of view, would be an expression of fiber. It's a neutral detergent fiber, and also the acid detergent fiber, which also indicate possibilities of low intake by your animal. When they are doing ration formulation, a feed that has high NDF is a very difficult feed to work with, because what the ration formulation solution does, it looks at what the animal will eventually benefit from. It looks at the effective feeding value, not how much of energy is available in the fodder when it is coming to the feeding trough. It is what the animal will eventually utilize. So NDF becomes a very critical parameter to look at if you ever take your sample to the lab and it has 70 to 75 NDF, then the intake, the dry matter intake for your animal, whether you're using this as a pure strand, whether you're giving the cows as just Napier for smallholder farmers, there are many who do that, or you are a farmer who is attempting TMR and therefore giving Napier with some hay, with some dairy meal, with some silage, that forage that has high NDF is going to affect the intake of the entire TMR. So be very careful about NDF when it is very high. We want it as low, if possible, below 50. Actually, 45 would be great, but 70 is really bad. When it is young, of course, you get better images for NDF. Let's talk about energy. The metabolizable energy of Napier is moderate. It will be between 8 and 9 at best. But if you look at maize will register up to 15. You know, you find 11, 12, 13, up to 15. 15, I haven't seen it in Kenya. We have done more than 100 samples in the last 3 years. Some of them we just do it to be able to do lessons like this. So we just pick a sample from your farm, we take it to the lab. There's some farmers who bring to us so that we make a ration for them. We also use them, we check also, and we haven't seen any sample of maize in Kenya that has done 15. But I've seen samples from the Netherlands that have 15 megajoules per kg dry matter for energy. For our maize, 11. For Napier here, we are talking about 8, which is okay. I think it's not a big problem. But it can also get better if you manage the husbandry and the harvesting. There's an element that you find in the sample called digestibility of organic matter. Again, that is a predictor of to what extent will the animal that you're feeding with this feed digest the material that you're feeding them. When you cut at 6 to 8 weeks, you have OM digestibility of 60 to 65, but then you expect that as it grows more and more, there is an exchange. When you look at, okay, let me go back to the graph. When you look at the graph, you have an increasing level of fiber, decreasing level of digestibility, decreasing level of dry matter. So you can see, increasing level of dry matter. So dry matter increases, fiber increases, protein reduces, digestibility reduces, and also NDF increases. So when we look at the, I think we just look at the sample here. I have a sample that I can be able to explain. I'm talking about this one, this particular element here, and this one, and this one. These ones, as Napier grows, they're also increasing. And as they increase, then the feeding value is reducing because the animal will not be able to finish that material. It is going to be unattractive. It is going to be to spend a lot of energy to chew, energy to digest, and most likely it will not be absorbed. I think the one from Mola Plus mentions this a lot of time about best to eat as much as they can, but then what you got is a lot of dung instead of having the feed utilized because some elements in it could not be digested. Now, this sample has energy. This is a TMR sample. That's why you notice there's even starch. It's a TMR. We have fat. We don't focus so much on this. It's not a big deal. I think when it comes to seed cakes, it becomes an issue. We have, this you don't find in Napier. There's no starch in Napier. Sometimes there was a claim that they are carbohydrates, but I think it also depends on which lab you take. There's a possibility that some labs, depending on which technologies they have, and I don't want to use those big words of spectroscopy and how they name them. That's not important for this lesson. But depending on, this is a crop nut outlook of a sample analysis. If you take to JKUAT or you take to Egerton University or to some other labs, you will find that they might express energy differently. So if you if they call it carbohydrate, it does not mean that we have starch. And even by observation, where are we going to get starch from Napier? Then we have the sugar. This is what I was talking about, digestibility. To what extent are we going to, this is a predictor of how much can the cow be able to digest from that matter or from that material you're feeding them. So this reduces significantly when you allow Napier to grow. So unless you are repurposing it for cuttings, Keep it 1 meter and not less and not more. Again, when you say less, it would be too wet. Then dry matter, this was also a broad spectrum analysis because it was also checking the aflatoxin. So I would encourage you to at least test the material you're using for your ration, especially for you who are doing TMR. Instead of telling the nutritionist that my Napier is this and that, or my maize is this and that, at least for once a year, take your crop to the lab. So therefore, then the nutritionist use the actual numbers for each of these nutritional parameters. Then the following year, since you're not doing precision farming, you may still, if you see the crop is not significantly different from the crop that you had earlier, then most likely you can continue using the same ration. If there's a major problem, your animals will show. And then you can call the nutritionist and say, I use the same ration, but I see a drop in milk production. As long as we can be able to exempt the issues of illnesses or metabolic issues, then we can go back and suspect it could be the ration, and maybe the elements we use for the TMR have a significant difference in their nutritional parameters. Like you got maize that is 25% starch last year, and now you have 14%. Because when it was being harvested, you were not there, and people picked the bigger cob, and then the bigger cob, and then you are left with a smaller one. So the starch on your maize is showing below detectable levels, and you're wondering what happened to the maize. Because Kenyans sometimes are dishonest, things happen like that. The bigger maize is taken, and then they don't declare. So you go to starch level and you find, hey, I had the same maize, it grew the same way, but I see that there's a drop in the milk production, or I'm being required to add maize germ or grain or dairy milk because I need to supplement my maize silage. Something could have happened, and therefore at that point, you need to test. So for Napier, I don't think that you need to keep testing. If you do a proper crop and you test it, then you do the same practice and you get the same from physical examination, you have the same crop, then most likely you can assume that you have the same parameters and you can give your ration, your nutritionist, to be able to make a ration using those estimations. Napier has its own, it is not free, or it's not that cheap. It has a cost to it, and it has also merits that we need to admit. Studies in Kenya have shown a cost of between 1 shilling and 60 cents, 2 shillings and 30 cents. That is as fed. So that is really the fresh weight. If you calculate this, it will be about 8 shillings, 12 per kg of dry matter. So if we take it as an average, it will be 10 shillings per kg of dry matter. I don't know whether I should now go to the chat and ask people what would be the cost of maize silage right now per kg of dry matter. Or because if I tell you to shout and I see we have 127 people, it will be a very big choir that might not be manageable. So Mary, if you're there, how many minutes do I have? I see whether I have this luxury.
You have around 45 minutes.
It's 20 because we are at 15:40 and we were to end at 4. Yeah, 20.
At 4. Okay, I have about 20. So I don't know whether I have, but I'll ask a question. I'll let you put on the chat. If you're talking about, let me go back to my presentation. I hope you can see it. If you're talking about 10 shillings per kg of dry matter for Napier, as the cost that has been calculated, these are people who are doing academic programs and therefore they are supervised. So there are references showing this range. So we are talking about 3 bob per kg. There's somebody who said, I think it was one of the groups saying that there's somebody who is paying farmers on an assumption that they can produce at one shilling for Napier. From this data, you can tell that if you give a farmer a shilling per kg of Napier fresh cut, they will be burning their fingers. It looks like if you have to really pay the farmer, it has to be slightly above 3 bob for fresh weight. But this was not really meant for you to know how to sell Napier, because I think that model is not very prominent right now. We are talking about if you are going to calculate the cost of your ration, and most of these ration formulation platforms solutions are using dry matter basis, then it is fair, and you can confidently use 10 shillings per kg DM, and that is good. That is good, because how much is dairy meal? If you're going to compare theoretically, and I say theoretically because they don't have the same parameters, but if you're to do theoretical comparison between this and another high dry matter feed, then dairy meal would be about that 5 shillings. Maize would be about 45 shillings. If you're lucky to get 15 shillings per kg as fed, then that is effectively 45 shillings if this maize is a dry matter of 30%, which is really for Kenya is, if you get 30% dry matter, you are very happy. All the samples we have done, we only got one sample out of about 50 that had a dry matter of 30 in maize. Our maize silage samples are registering less than 30%, and we are getting about 20 something, and a lot of them between 10 and 15, and a lot of them also below detectable levels for people who are buying maize without cob, or people who bought maize and the cob was taken away without their knowledge. Napier has a merit in the forage yield. Napier's greatest advantage is the biomass production. I have been to a farm in Nigeria, and I found this farmer having very nice bracharia. And he was very proud to say, look, I have bracharia. I also have a plot of Lucerne. This guy was really, people have come in to see his farm because of those having been innovative and showing those varieties. And most of these he has picked from other countries. But you see, this farmer also had a challenge with feeding. He had stockouts of basal forages like grass. So we agreed, why don't we dedicate all this space to Napier and do away with the bracharia? And he was saying, why would we do that? Bracharia is far much better than Napier. And the answer is yes, because bracharia is going to give me a much better digestibility, a much better protein level, effective crude protein, because there's no lignin really in bracharia. By the time you get lignin in bracharia, I don't know what you'll have done, because the stems are soft. It's like Kikuyu grass. All the entire thing is palatable. There's no stem for the cow to struggle with. So if you look at the effective nutrition profile for any grass like Kikuyu grass, very well managed hay and bracharia, then you could say, yeah, let's go for the bracharia. But this person, what they're having a problem with is not very much the crude protein issues. The issues they have is biomass. They just don't have feed in the store. And therefore, Napier would be the savior in a context where the problem is a feedstock running out. To that extent, it now appears like bracharia is luxurious. You can't be having bracharia and you're having, and quarter of the year, you're going to the market to buy feeds. Then you may need to wonder, am I the right person for bracharia? If you have space challenges, you only have 2 acres, you have your number of cows, and then you have bracharia for 1 acre. In that case, just switch to Napier, because you have a problem of biomass. You can deal with the issue of the nutritional deficiency at another level. Very much like somebody who has no food. When they get the first 50 shillings, they're likely to go and buy unga to make ugali for the children. And then we look for some sukuma wiki or spinach. Then the children can be fed for that day, and they can have a time to think about what to do tomorrow. But they cannot go for meat, because then there's still no supper for that day. That's the whole idea. I'm not saying bracharia is not a good idea, but please consider what really is your problem. Is it biomass, or are you struggling in a more detailed problem of a crude protein? Then the other one is the year-round production. Being a perennial, once it is established, it can be harvested for multiple times a year. Beautiful. Again, that is the reason. That's why I was explaining. It is a savior. Napier is a savior. And that is why even commercial farmers have come back to Napier. After a few years ago, when I worked in cooperatives, through a wider dairy program in Kenya, you could see farmers really shunning away from Napier because they are bigger farmers. But today they see a role of Napier in the TMR because of being able to provide the grain material across the year, especially for those who are in good climatic zones. Palatability, this is relative because it depends on when you harvest it. If you harvest and chop at the right stage, around 1 meter tall, which is basically before the typical flowering stage, then Napier grass is quite palatable, and cows, you can see cows basically eating away everything. Now, in general, we are talking about Napier is cost effective. It's inexpensive. At Kenya, at 10 shillings, if we have any international listener on the program, we are talking about USD 0.07. It is far cheaper per nutrient unit than purchased concentrates or even purchased hay. Once planted, a Napier plot can remain productive for 3 to 5 years or more. And therefore, from an accounting perspective, you can be able to spread the cost over a number of years. And that now reduces the cost of the economic unit. The cost of the feeding unit. However, when I say that Napier is cheaper than this, cheaper than that, I should be very careful that I'm not advocating for single forage feeding. Because what we are campaigning for, what we are championing, is full ration feeding. So you have Napier, you have maize germ, you have hay, you have your energy source could be maize silage or sorghum, whichever you have. The ration formulation is going to be a combination of those, and then give you the best bet or the best combination that is most efficient, but with the higher return on investment. Because initially, we look at playing with the various feeds that you have at the farm until we have it balanced on crude protein, on energy, on dry matter. And then we also look at, are you also making money? So if I have 20 minutes, if I have 10 minutes, let me deal with this. Then we can agree how to move forward. So limitations of Napier. Napier has a major limitation with the dry matter. We have talked about this. And this also explains why, no matter how we can push the narrative of crude protein as a selling point, there isn't much magic we can do to avoid this. Because if you have, imagine some of the most, I don't want to use the word useless, like I want to use the least valuable. Feeding materials like banana stem or banana leaves. That's about, a leaf is about 10% moisture, banana leaf. Banana stem is about 5%. Sorry, not moisture, it's dry matter. 5% dry matter. Hydroponics is between 8 and 10% dry matter. So you can see we are talking about it's not very far from that. So that really is a limitation. And when we wilt, we can be able to achieve 25%. That's why we say, to answer the initial question about should I wilt, even if the cows enjoy it as fresh cut, it is important for ration formulation, for proper feeding to wilt, so that we can be able to boost the dry matter to at least 25%. That now comes to the same level as kikuyu grass and bacteria and other grasses. We have another limitation of the protein content. At typical cutting ages, Napier's crude protein, I am afraid that most farmers, even though they have planted improved varieties, there is a likelihood that they are getting less than 10%. It is just that they have not tested. You don't need to take to the lab. I think I shouldn't make an impression that everybody should go to the lab. It's a nice thing to do, but sometimes it's expensive. I also have to agree. But even by observing, if your Napier has very hard stems, or is turning yellowish, or is stunting, or is producing flowers, then all those things by observation you can tell. Regardless of what variety you planted, you're not getting the claimed nutritional promise. Most likely you have much less, and you're just like somebody who had a poor managed varieties that were before Kakamega, that were really not so much advanced. So the fiber and maturity, if Napier is allowed to overgrow all stem and flowering, the fiber becomes lignified, and this reduces digestibility and intake. Animals may refuse the thick stalks. The word is not really refusing, is that you get high leftover. And this is a challenge we've had in many farms. When you go to a farm, you find that they have so much leftover, but the manager does not see like anything. Actually, what they do, they take that leftover and they push it to the bedding. So the cows are very clean at the expense of the money you spend to buy your forages. So leftover is a critical parameter. It's actually a performance management issue in farms. There are farms that are actually wasting like half of what was put in the trough. Then you find them now making manure, compost manure. Then you wonder, what was the objective? Were they really making milk or meat, or are they into manure? Because they look more excited making compost manure when it all came from leftovers of many months. Ideally, for a good manager, leftovers should be reported. But these cows are remaining a lot. What can we do? And we can be able to say, I think we are doing something wrong in our Napier. We are letting it grow too much, and that's why we are getting more leftover. If it is not checked, then you are bleeding money, which is not a good idea. Then there's that issue of nitrate or nitrite poisoning. There are two aspects here. Number one is the over-fertilization. Remember that earlier, at the time of basics of Napier, we talked about how much of fertilizer would be required. I don't think there's a huge risk, because I saw a lot of scare on DAFMA, people saying, then am I risking nitrite poisoning? Where there is a possibility of that, imagine where we have animals, we have a cow shed, and the slurry is flowing into a Napier farm, flowing continually, and then you go cut that Napier when it is young, and you are feeding the cows every day. So, and you are feeding the cows every day, and the component or the proportion of Napier in that ration is high. Clearly, I don't see you escaping such a risk. But if you're using fertilizer, the chances, it's very unlikely that we are going to put more fertilizer. In fact, Africa entirely has been documented as the continent where fertilizer is least used. We used like half or a third of what some countries like Brazil use. So chances of people putting more fertilizer when planting or after cutting are very low if you look at the data. But what is likely to give us this nitrite risk is the issue of slurry flowing into the Napier, cut it young, feed every day, and a high component of Napier in the TMR. That for me would be very risky. And I think once you have this poisoning, you won't get much help, because the death comes very, very soon. I think there's no challenge. The other challenge is prussic acid, and this is also like sorghum, because when you have stress for water, I think sorghum is also a major culprit for this. If it didn't rain enough and you didn't irrigate, and you have sorghum trying to adapt to a low water environment, then as part of its adaptive or coping mechanisms, there are some substances that are produced that become anti-nutrients and poisonous to the cow. So if you really know that your crop is not drought resistant, don't let the crop begin to use its adaptive mechanisms to adapt to an environment that is really not good for it, because then what you get is not what you expected, because as the plant tried to cope with itself, it now gives you some unfriendly substances that may risk death. And if you have tested the insurance product, you know they don't actually pay you if your animals die as a result of poisoning from feed. They assume that it should be possible for you to control, and therefore they don't take that risk. My time is up. I want to make a recommendation that the people who are present on this call, that we have a next lesson on ration formulations with Napier, so that we can be able to give attention to rations. I may even step aside and bring in one of my colleagues who has made more than 100 rations, and be able to show what rations are there. We have a way of complementing, because we can be able to calculate the cost of each ration, but to show how Napier is going to feature in a TMR. So let it be a part 2. I see somebody saying, let's do a part 2. I agree. I think it was a bite of more than we can chew, because we had hoped that we are going to get into TMR combinations for Napier, and it looks like it may not be possible. Please, I invite you in advance. I'm not the head of EREVOOKA, neither am I the administrator. I think Jerry could be on the call, and Mary, who is putting those posters. Please announce when we have Winning with Napier Part 2, which is going to focus entirely on the formulations with Napier, so that you see in which ways are we incorporating Napier in rations, and which is the most effective way for smallholder farmers, depending on different cow live weights, milk production expectations, and so on. So let me go back to Mary to read certain questions. We see whether we can be able to answer them, so that we don't keep people longer than what was indicated on the poster.
Thank you so much, David, for the insightful presentation you just did. We really learned a lot on Napier, agronomy, and economic part of it, and how we can apply that in TMR. And I'm very sure that everyone has picked up some valuable lessons they can apply in their own farm. So now we move to the question and answer session. And I'll be reading out some of the questions that have come in through the chat. And David is going to help us in responding to that. So the first question is from CC, and is asking, whatever farmer has only Napier as fodder, what other concentrates would be ideal to achieve the 20 liters production?
Okay, that question, was that the question of one of the listeners, or it was my question? It was a question I had indicated on the first slide, that questions that farmers ask. So that question, Mary, it is a question of rations, basically asking, if I only have Napier, what else would I need to be able to get a production of 20 liters for my cow that is 450 kgs on live weight at early lactation? Because all those parameters must be mentioned for us to be able to be accurate. Some of the questions that are asked in the groups, sometimes we don't know what to do, because you say, I have Napier and my cow is producing 15, what else do I give? So we don't know what stage, whether it's early lactation. We don't know whether we are dealing with the pedigree, or we are dealing with a level 2. We don't know what kind of Napier you have. A lot of assumptions. It's more like when vets say, don't describe the problem on phone, call a vet to examine, because things can go wrong. So to answer you briefly, is that question now goes to rations, because we shall be demonstrating how Napier, what else is needed to make a complete ration for that cow, and which cow can actually produce 20 liters on what ration. So let's
Okay, we have another question from CC.
Part 2.
We have another question from CC, and he's asking whether you can use chicken manure just like nitrogen for top dressing.
I think it's okay, but because we know that chicken manure comes from different substances, pure from chicken, it is mixed with the leftover feed from concentrates. There are labs that can test manure, and if you test once, it might be, say, like 5,000 or thereabouts, or 10,000 manure looks like, and what it can be able for you use it, or before you assume that you have sufficiently fed your Napier with manure. But if you don't want to do that, then just proceed with it. The Napier will show you whether it has sufficient nitrogen. I see the question of what is the CP of red Australian. It is claimed to be between 15 and 18, but it is not the selling point. The selling point for this Napier has been the softness, the succulency, and the sweetness. So does Junca have the stinging hair? Yeah. If you have one that has hair, I think there's a problem. If you have a WhatsApp group where the discussions are held, the WhatsApp group is called DAFMA. You can send a request to Mary to include you. I think most people here are at DAFMA. It's basically the signature WhatsApp where we put all the information. It's more like a networking and trading group.
Okay.
The presentation we shared, yes, we will share, not a problem. Yeah. Nutritional values of Napier grass at different weekend. We will also take some tests. Yeah, go ahead, Mary.
We have another question from Rio, and he's asking whether does manure or fertilizer in your fields have impact on CP, or is the CP cast on stone based on the variety?
Okay, there's someone, I see Dr. David Mwang is saying that Pak Chong is susceptible to Napier head smut and stunting disease. Yes, that's a good comment. Like I said, these varieties haven't yet been, I think there's still a lot that we don't know. Maybe after we have had a full profile and registration, we might find more things. But for now, someone is saying that it is susceptible to head smut and stunting. Good information. We are learning, and thank you very much. I guess this could be Dr. Miano. The same susceptibility difference between Napier and dairy meal is the energy levels. What about dry matter? Dry matter would be basically the most prominent difference in terms of feeding value, because the energy levels would also be featured under dry matter. The most limiting nutrient in our systems is energy, not protein. Correct. It is energy and not protein. I agree. I hope I didn't say otherwise. Visibility, high energy. Correct. When NDF is lower than 40%, there's a risk for rumen acidosis. Yes, let's stay with 45. 45. Okay, I see people also discussing in the group, which is also very good. It is 4 minutes past 4. Mary, if there's a burning question which you think does not go to part 2, then we can address it. Otherwise, what you can do is to write all the questions so that we ensure in our part 2 that all these issues are addressed. And where we need to find out more information, like I said, we are consolidating our knowledge. Then we are going to find out more knowledge to ensure that we answer the questions in the best way we can. Trained on TMR formulation? Yes.
I think most of the questions have been answered, but if there is any remaining unanswered question, kindly allow us so that we can compile them and we'll give you the responses right after the session.
Perhaps you need to confirm that all of them are in DAFMA, because we can be able to put some of the answers there that don't have to wait for part 2.
We have shared the link to the DAFMA farmer group, so if you haven't joined, kindly check through the chat. You'll get the link. Kindly make sure that we join.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, David, for a wonderful masterclass on Napier. We are learning very, very, very new things. And of course, demystifying some of the things about why, if I have Napier, then I do not need to do dairy meal. Yeah, so our next lesson will be winning with the Napier part 2. And our nutritionist will be taking us through how we can play around with rations. That is next week, same time. I would like you to join DAFMA, because you have a lot of learning in there, both farmer-led and also from our experts. DAFMA is a WhatsApp group dedicated to dairy fodder and beef and livestock, large ruminants. The other thing is that we have a lot of content on our social media platforms, on especially YouTube. Please, when you go to YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel, PERFOMETER, and you'll be able to learn quite a lot. Some of the things we discuss here are also discussed in that forum. So we appreciate you so much for being able to join. We will be running a series every Friday until the end of November. And then we're also planning something fantastic in January. We shall be announcing a whole year learning program that's tailored around the value chains. We shall have a beef value chain, we shall have a goat, we shall have sheep, we shall have even fish. You can invite some of your aquaculture friends, even those of us who want to learn. Yeah, so we are putting up a very comprehensive faculty to disseminate information. And of course, we're also responding to what we've been seeing in the groups, the knowledge gap, but from a very well-informed point. So thank you so much, David, for taking your time to prepare, and of course, helping us in a simple way to understand what it is that we can do with our Napier, which of course is a very good forage for dairy farmers. Thank you, Mary, for helping us document the questions. So just to say that we'll be sharing some of the answers in the group and also next week. And for those of us who joined late, this recording will be shared in the group also together with the presentation. Thank you so much. We would like to close the meeting at this point. We appreciate your patience. We also apologize for the poor network. I think the rains are also interfering with a bit of network, so it is not something that we would take for granted that you're able to come. So we are so sorry, especially the first few minutes of the lesson. We were not able to, we were not very clear, network issues, but we appreciate your patience. And thank you so much. Next time we put this poster, please invite your friends, spare time, and let's learn together. Thank you so much. Have a blessed weekend.